Welcome back, Mr. Jansen. Thank you so much. And we are continuing our podcast today, discussing the 401k, and we've been working on the plan summary and sort of getting the rules of the road as it relates to the employer and employee, as far as responsibilities and how things work within this plan. And so we've gone through a lot of the things, including 401k loans and hardship withdrawals. Um, is there anything new in the 401k landscape or do we miss anything on the description?
Yeah, I think it's good. I'm just gonna pull up the description one more time just to kind of
Okay.
reintroduce everybody that's on this video. So I'm just gonna grab this summary plan description, right? So let me know when I've got that up on the screen, Carl.
There it is. Perfect.
Excellent. So just a real quick refresher from our prior video, we're talking about the summary plan description or the SPD, and this is that free publication required by law to be provided to all 401k participants. So if you have an employer plan, you're with an employer that has a 401k, please run down to HR or email your HR department, right, and get this summary plan description. One of the things that's in there, and I would call it newer, although it's been around for a number of years, but I still have clients that are like, oh my gosh, this is the first time I've seen it or heard about it, on the investment side. So we're on a few pages into this example of the summary plan description, but most plans these days are what we call self-directed, right, where an employee is going to be able to pick their own investments, right? That's been around for a very, very long time. But what's changed over the last handful of years, and again, maybe starting in 1994, I know that sounds way back, but some people still have not experienced it, right? I'm still getting aha moments from clients, which is something called a target date fund. So when you can self-direct your own investments, there's probably 20 to 30 different funds inside of your 401k, but they will default you. And by default, that is a very technical term. So I'm going to make it simple, right? Our job on these videos is to keep it simple. When you sign up or get signed up for the 401k at your employer, they're going to automatically select an investment for you by default, right? So that is a requirement from the Department of Labor. They have to put you into a specific tool. Well, back before 1994 happened, unfortunately, a lot of people would get a note or in their payroll, right, slip, it would say, hey, we've signed you up for the 401k and you're off and running. So, we've got your participation, and you would think, great. Hey, I'm already in the 401k. And it might take a couple months, or maybe, 6 months later, you open up one of those statements and you see your balance and you're thinking, wow, this is great. It's kind of automatic. It's all the things that I was hoping it would be. I'm getting a match from the employer, but you never maybe took a look at what the default investment option was. Well, before 1994, it used to be the money market fund. Oh no, now all my money is going into the money market fund, and this is supposed to be a long-term investment, right? And
Right.
so, Carl, can you imagine what happened to a lot of people before 1994, right? When their money was stuck in a money market fund for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years as they were preparing for retirement. Any guesses?
Yeah. My first initial thought would be stomach cramps because of the lack of returns that they had earned being sidestepped from the market for a decade or 15 or 20 years.
Exactly. Exactly. So thinking back, and grab a chart or Google this if you need to, thinking back to the mid to late 90s, very specifically, you missed out on some stuff, right? And then moving into the post, right? Even the dot-com bubble after it burst, the run up that we had all the way to 2007 and 8 before the next recession. So you are absolutely right. Stomach cramps followed by the math right meltdown in your mind on what you missed out, because you can't go back, right? So what the industry decided to do, in the mid 90s, was to come out with something called the Target Date Fund. And what makes it very, very powerful, is that what it specifically does, as you probably have figured out by the name, Target Date Fund, it's targeting the date of your retirement. So if you're 35, it's targeting 65. And as we've talked about in a prior video, for our long-term buckets, we need to be thinking, right, more risk. I want to be taking advantage of the market, of the stock market, and some of those opportunities. It's going to have you in a riskier investment design, but it's still fully diversified. If you heard one of our prior videos, about the Fidelity Balanced Fund, for example, if there are tools that can be fully diversified with your correct timeline in mind, that can be way more powerful than just being in the money market fund, right? If you are the type of investor who would rather have, right, hands-off experience, you'd rather say, hey, I want to delegate this investment experience, the target date fund can be a very, very powerful tool. Now, with your plan, they might call it something different. It might be called a glide path fund. So just be thinking if it has a number or a year in the description of the fund, it might say something like it's the 2055 target date fund or the 2060 glide path fund. You're going to think to yourself, oh my gosh, that is so far in the future, right? But in
Right.
reality, if you're in your 30s or 40s, it might be 25 to 35 years right down the road. And that would make sense.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, a recommendation, if you're the kind of employee that, maybe doesn't love the investment world, right? This isn't a passion. You don't love looking up Morningstar reports, and you want to put something that target date fund might be a good option as sort of your internal default, if you will, to park money until you decide on one of the other 30 plus options that the employer has for you in the 401k. And sometimes, when we look at those lists and we see 401k statements, it's interesting, right? Because a lot of times you'll see people on there and they have one or two selections,
Yep.
and it's super, super heavy cash. And then, they tiptoed into one equity mutual fund provided by the 401k, and they're 32 years away from retiring. And you go, it
It's
might be
happening.
time to look at this and talk to a certified financial planner to have somebody help give you a recommendation to have this thing rebalanced and in something more appropriate. But the target date fund sort of mimics, if you will, it sounds like a little bit of the that Morningstar report that we looked at for the Fidelity Balanced, which, if you remember, had a mix of equities as well as bonds, right? That was the design of that particular mutual fund. And so some of these target funds are probably built with that metric in mind also.
Exactly. Yep. Fully diversified. And they're usually built by the bigger providers, the Vanguards, the
Mhm.
Fidelities, right? Those types of institutions that actually have the depth, right, of all of the investment options that you would be looking for: large cap, mid cap, small cap, some international, right? You're going to want a company if they're doing a target date fund. So that's a good way to judge it is if they have enough depth, right, of their own investments to select from. That's typically a good clue that you might have a good target date provider, a name that you would typically recognize in the marketplace, right? One of the bigger investment companies. But as you mentioned before, Karl, if you're the type of person that wants to do it yourself, the 401k is originally designed to do that. You can pick your own investments. You mentioned on the prior video, you can stop making contributions when you want. It's your money. You can change investments when you want, right? It's self-directed. But there might be some limitations on some of those things, right? There are some companies, some 401k plans, they will try to discourage what our industry calls day trading. They're
Mhm.
not going to want you to get in there every day to change your allocations. So I
Right.
have seen more recently, the last couple of years, some 401k providers put some brakes on that, which is if they sense that you're changing every day, there's no cost to you to make those changes, hard costs, but there is a cost to the 401k provider, right? There are going to
Yes.
be transactions, right, that get created there in the market, in the stock market. So they will try to discourage that. I haven't seen them penalize anybody, but they might just prevent you if you try to make too many back-to-back trades. They might just kind of freeze your ability for a week or maybe 2 weeks, right, to kind of buy some more time back. But I do want listeners to know if you do feel like a change is necessary, either that you're learning more or you want to apply a little bit more risk, right? You can make those changes typically pretty frequently. So
And
it's
like
a
you'd
good.
mentioned, I think before on the Morningstar that you had pulled up in the previous session that we're talking about, which was, I think, the Fidelity Balanced Mutual Fund. On the 401k options and choices, typically, at least in the bigger platforms, they have hyperlinks with a lot of the options so that you can click on that and get something approximating, if not an actual Morningstar report, to again confirm that if it says, large cap value, US, that are they really invested in those things that trust but verify so that if you do it yourself, you can make sure that you're picking appropriate things that are actually in what they say they are. Otherwise,
Exactly.
that target date fund and glide path type fund might be more appropriate if some of the selections are thin, right? Because every plan provider seems to have, a different number of funds and a different mix.
That's right. Yep. I love how you exactly quoted that. Trust but verify. And are they doing what they say they're supposed to be
Mhm.
doing? Yes. Those are really big clues. The other way to do it is once you click on the hyperlinks and you can see exactly the type of fund it is, you can also create your own version, right, of a target date fund. I have some
Right.
clients that are like, Clay, I just don't feel comfortable with international investments, right? I don't feel comfortable in that space. I either don't know enough, it's just not something I'm ready to take on from a risk perspective, right? You could see inside the target date fund the holdings that it has, and
Mhm.
maybe you just recreate all the rest of the holdings in your own 401k selection. You just don't include the one that's in there in the target date fund for international, right? So you could actually
Correct.
use it. Yeah, you could actually kind of, I don't want to say steal it, right? But you could borrow the structure, right, from the target date fund and say, hey, I do want to focus on my retirement. Maybe I need to have all of those little wedges. I'm just going to take out that one for international and I'm going to select a large cap value fund from my lineup that's 20% and a large cap growth that's 15%, right? So use those also when you
Love
click
it.
on those hyperlinks. That's a really easy slam dunk way to create your own before you maybe seek counsel from a financial planner or an advisor. That's kind of another little way you could start doing it if you are more interested. Do it yourself.
Can you also speak to the fact that there's some contribution limits to the 401ks, right?
Yes. Yep. There
And
is.
and there's a couple of asterisks like this is the max unless.
Yes.
Can you talk about those a
Unless,
little bit? Because I think that's
yeah.
another thing that people miss. And, if you've been, in the workforce for a while and we look at these, annual summaries and the corporate benefits, once a year, it's kind of easy to gloss over the fact that there's some ifs and buts.
Yes. Yep. So anybody can participate in a 401k, right? Out of their paycheck. Every year, we call that employee salary deferral. That's what they call it, right? So out of your own paycheck, we happen to be in 2024 right now this year, right? We're kind of coming up here at the tail end of 24. But that employee can take out of their own paycheck $23,000 if they would like. Now, I have some employees that say, hey, I might not get there this year. That's fine, but there is a limit, right?
Yep.
The asterisk that you mentioned is pretty typically we see what's called a catch-up provision. So if you're age 50 or older, and that's really important, anytime you turn 50, let's say this year, you have the ability to put in more money, right? So in this year, in 2024, it happens to be an additional $7,500.
It's a
You
lot.
could get, it's a
It's a
lot of
lot.
money. You could put in $30,500 out of your own paycheck, right, into your own 401k plan, right?
Especially
That,
with the compounding of money, right? If
oh
you're
my gosh.
50 and you're going to work till you're 65, let's say, that is some massive amounts of money. And I'd love to just tie that back to, and if you missed it, please watch the last segment where Clay did such a great job on the description summary of if you've picked a Roth, right?
Yeah, that's
Because it's
right.
not just about the contributions going into the bucket. Someday, when we're eligible, we will take money out of the bucket, right? Presumably to live on. And it would be
Yep.
great if we had a tax advantage plan that wasn't going to kill us on the back door with the money returning back to us.
Yep. So consult with your CPA first, right? Because you're going to want a game plan for this. But I'm going to echo the last segment and what Karl just said right there. If you aren't using a Roth feature anywhere in your personal life right now, I always say this on most of our videos. If there's one thing you're going to take away from this video is please consider using the Roth, right, feature inside your 401k. But the footnote to that is make sure you're working with your CPA because you do have to pay taxes up front for the Roth feature. So you might need to increase your withholding, right? Or you have to have a plan because this money that's going into the 401k out of your own paycheck, the employer is always going to match pre-tax or profit share to your account pre-tax. So you're always going to get some pre-tax dollars typically from your employer. But my gosh, my number one complaint, Carl, that I get from my 70-year-old new clients, not existing clients, but new clients who are 65 to 70 years old, they're retiring, they've had successful careers, they've saved money into the long-term bucket. And when I coach them and I say, hey, you might have 500,000, a million, $2 million in your 401k, but none of it's in the Roth. It's all going to be taxed
Mm.
when it comes out. Their eyes like bug out the size of their heads, right? And they say, why didn't anybody tell me that there was a Roth feature in my 401k? Trust me, your HR director or the owner of the company, right, or the payroll provider is not going to tell you this, right? They're not going to write a note to you in your paycheck that says, hey, by the way, you should look at the Roth. But it is something that I would encourage everybody consider doing. If you haven't started, it's never too late. If part of your retirement income in retirement could be tax-free, that would be the part that you would use, maybe to buy the new car, to take the trip, right? Or a retirement party, or whatever you plan on doing, right? That way you have some access to some tax-free money. That would be amazing if everybody could do that.
I love it. Okay, let me summarize. I want to summarize this so that, because I think this is such a critical piece of the investment world that we're talking about today. So, some key takeaways that Clay's mentioned. I'm going to try to encapsulate these. Tell me if I miss any.
You got it,
Um,
Carl.
Number
Shoot.
one, uh, investigate the Roth option for a 401k.
Absolutely.
Number two, if you invest a small amount in your 401k, make sure you at least cover the match of the employer.
Yes.
Get all the match.
All of it. Free
Contribute
money. Free
free
money.
money until it hurts.
Yep.
Try to maximize, step three on that is try to maximize your contribution limits slowly, gradually over time um, as you can assimilate that.
Yep.
Um, and number four is if you are a set it and forget it individual, consider looking at the glide path and the target date funds so that somebody's already sort of pre-chewed um, that risk tolerance idea for the mix of assets. So you can pick one thing, shove your money in there and kind of forget it and go on with your life. If you're more of a do-it-yourselfer, take the time and the opportunity to investigate all the different plan options and create your own bucket of assets to put into your plan, but don't just let it sit in something idle that isn't going to go anywhere because we don't want to go 5, 10 years and find that it was on the sidelines.
That's right. That's
Did I
right,
miss,
Carl.
did I miss
That's
anything
great.
else?
Great summary points. Last thing I'll say that I'll add to that, which we haven't chatted about, most 401k providers now have some really great additional tools that are often free to use. Risk tolerance questionnaire, budgeting tools,
Hmm.
aggregating tools. They now allow you to aggregate some of your other accounts so you can kind of see the bigger picture. So look into some of those tools because they might actually help with those 4 bullet points that you just covered in our summary, right? There
Well,
might
let
be
me add the
ways.
fifth. The fifth is if you're over 50, make sure you're contributing. If you're maxing it out already,
Totally.
make sure to take advantage of those catch-up provisions
Get the
because
catch-ups in there. Yep. But just
that
keep in mind the tools that are on the 401k, they might not know you and your spouse and your family needs completely. They're going to be assuming some things. They might know enough for them to be dangerous. They might know your paycheck because it's coming from the employer. They might be able to understand what your approximate Social Security is, except they don't know all the jobs that you had before that employer, right? They won't know your budget because there isn't enough information, right? So just kind of use them with a grain of salt, but it
Mhm.
is a great place to tap into some of those tools, especially risk tolerance, some of the basic budgeting things, and letting you know, to your point right there, if you haven't maxed out. I love it for that reason because it will tell you, hey, you could put in another 6,000 this year, 7,000 this year, whatever that gets you to your maximum limits.
And those tools have come such a long way
Oh,
in the last 10 years. I mean,
yep.
it wasn't too long ago, right? Where you would try to log in and you'd be lucky if you could even see a balance,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
It's crazy.
Totally.
So yeah, take advantage and all the bigger players, in the 401k world where the plan administrators are, everybody knows, I'm sure the big players, they have a lot of options,
Yep.
poke around in there and see what's available. And of course, if you have any questions, please reach out to Clay
Yeah.
directly and you can, get a hold of him and have him, help guide you through the path, but we want to give as much free information that we can to people so you can start, building on this financial literacy to do the things that you can do yourselves until you feel like, okay, I now need to hand this off to a professional. I've exceeded my ability or my desire in a lot of cases, to do these things. Um, so thank you so much, Clay. Really appreciate you
Always
walking
a
us
pleasure,
through
Karl.
the 401k. And we stay tuned. We will have some future podcasts coming up soon, and look forward to seeing everybody then. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.